So I have been a meditator in the mindfulness tradition for probably 40 years now. I began in my 20s, and I have been actually a pretty regular meditator, a daily meditator, since then. And I never expected to integrate this aspect of my life with the rest of my work and life. But I've seen the benefits of it for many, many years myself. What I feel at this point, having had a practice for so many years, is that it's sort of a non-negotiable for me. I used to get up in the mornings that I had a plane flight, and I used to allow myself to do it on the plane, but I no longer do that even, because I feel like if I don't start my day in that centered kind of way, then the rest of the day really doesn't flow as easily as it could. I feel like it's had many effects that have been positive, from being able to stay calm in pretty serious situations in terms of my work and my life, to be able to regulate those emotions, to have more empathy for others because I'm already taking care of my own emotions. It's helped me balance my inner life with my outer life of service. It's affected so much of who I am, and what's exciting to me is now I feel I can directly bring some of those benefits into K through 12 education as well. Absolutely, absolutely. So not only do I feel personal benefits, from good health, and I also feel the benefits of what happens when I'm able to be fully present with those I love, family, friends, and so on. So yeah, I feel like it's this part of me is completely integrated in who I am, and I'm very grateful that it's so accessible to me. I began my career in education as a teacher in East Harlem. I went on to be a assistant principal and a principal in the New York City schools, and then later on began to work in nonprofit organizations that support work in schools, then called, and still is called, social and emotional learning, where we would teach young people direct skills in handling their emotions and being more self-aware, etc. But I would say the last 10 years or so, actually 12, I have been very involved in bringing in the contemplative practice aspect into the work of social and emotional learning. And that happened unfortunately, because of September 11th, when I was asked by the school system to, quote, help the schools in Ground Zero recover. On that day, a lot of people don't know that 8,000 kids ran for their lives and over 200 educators with them. And they were in a state afterwards of deep grief, as well as anxiety and all those kinds of things. And lots of people came in to help, but they were things like therapy. And we soon realized that there just wouldn't even be enough money to support people in that way. And they began to let me do a little experimenting in bringing in the contemplative practice work. And that's when our work took a big shift in bringing this work in a more concrete way into many classrooms. And then we began to realize, as we began to teach teachers some of these practices, and they were benefiting so hugely by them, one teacher said to me, Linda, we really needed this on September 10th, right? So then we began to realize that we don't have to wait for a catastrophe like 9/11 to realize that just living in today's complex society, we need to arm teachers with these skills, and principals who lead schools and have to make critical decisions on a daily basis. So now we have begun to incorporate this work as part of the work in social and emotional learning. we were lucky enough to do a research project in 2007 looking at teachers that had never experienced any form of contemplative practice before, and then, of course, students who had not. And we found incredible results, actually. It was a small study, 857 kids and about 70 or so teachers, but the good news is that we found some differences in the adults who were less stressful and had higher what's called relational trust with their colleagues, and they also were more mindful. And for the kids, we found that their frustration levels decreased and what's called their sense of autonomy increased. And so this is a research study that was done with our work of the Inner Resilience Program, and it was one of the first kind of scientific studies out there, and we need a lot more than that. And there was a control group, and those changes were not seen in the control group, etc. So very hopeful, really very hopeful. One way I see this work of contemplative practice really taking root in K-12 education is to first step back a little and do more research, because a lot of the research that's been done so far that we can look to have been done on adults. And there are a lot of questions we have around children. We see anecdotally the small pockets of places like our program and others that are doing this work, but we need to have the kind of rigorous research behind us before schools are going to be open to this. So that's one of the things I see in the future, that we need as many researchers who are interested in the contemplative neuroscience field to be studying us more and to be doing that kind of rigorous research, because I think K-12 education is really going to need that for it to be front and center, given what is required right now and what demands are happening for schools right now. But the good news is that we have something in this work to help kids learn better. It's as simple as that. You know, if you can focus your attention better, then you're going to be able to access those parts of the brain that are short and long-term memory, that is the seat of learning. We also know when that kids are overwhelmed with any emotion, anxiety, sadness, grief, that they get hijacked and they're not able to access that part of the brain, that executive control function of the brain that helps them focus. So the good news is that the very thing we're asking to have brought in to K-12 education is something that can not only affect well-being, you know, that kids will be able to regulate their emotions better, they'll be able to have more empathy toward other people, they'll be able to get along better with others, but the good news is that they're going to learn better, and we're going to eventually see their academic results there as well, that their standardized test results should get better as well. We know this is true when kids are taught social and emotional learning. We know, for example, that in the research around social and emotional learning, kids do 11 percentile points better in their academics than young people that don't experience that kind of learning in their schools, in their classroom. So just think what adding the mindfulness piece could do. I have high hopes for that. Contemplative practices and ways of knowing and being, and some of the sort of underpinnings of this work are beginning to go mainstream, because we're seeing it all over. And we're also seeing the results of our mindlessness, you know, and we're also realizing that the complex problems that we are about to face and that we are facing and that our kids will face are ones that are so complex they need the kind of insight and creativity to solve them that we don't currently have. And so we're going to need to have very, very sharp minds. And I think that this work is happening in many areas. I mean, what heartens me about this conference is that I'm excited about what's happening in my field of education. But honestly, I did not have any idea until this conference that the same committed work and research was being done in fields I had no idea about. So it's sort of like, you know, when you want to save the world and you're a poet, you write a poem. You know, when I want to help education, I know what to do. I had no idea that others like me who cared so deeply and knew how important it would be to add this piece to their work were doing the same deep work that was happening in education. This was truly new to me coming to this conference, and that really makes me feel we are at the cutting edge of going mainstream. And we need to be very conscious, however, how we do that, and very, very purposeful and intentional of how we do that, so that we do it in a way that doesn't, you know, cause people to stumble, that doesn't make people feel that it's a religious persuasion, that, you know, doesn't do anything that would make folks feel as though we are not honoring separation of church and state, for example, in schools. So what we bring into schools has to be secularized, it has to be universal, it has to be void of, you know, any specific religious tradition. And I think that the more careful we are with that, and really intentional we are with that, the more chance we have of going mainstream. My second book is called Schools with Spirit, Nurturing the Inner Lives of Children and Teachers, and I go into quite a bit around this in that book, around how important it is that we honor anybody's religious tradition in what we do in this realm of the contemplative practice work, or some people are calling it mindfulness-based intervention, as well as honor people who are not coming from a faith tradition. So what we do in a classroom should be things that anyone would feel that if they had a faith tradition, they weren't in any way denying that tradition or doing something that would not permit them to do that. And for someone that didn't have a faith tradition, they would feel comfortable enough in what they were being asked to do. So in some cases, it really takes educators to make that bridge, because often some of this work, not so much the work that I'm doing, because it doesn't come from any specific religious tradition. It's a combination of things that come from neuroscience, yes, from some of the wisdom traditions, but also from psychology of what we know. But in some cases, the people wishing that schools would go in this direction are people that are strongly of a particular wisdom tradition. And they need folks like me and others who can translate that and secularize that work in such a way that it can be used, and yet the essence and the wisdom of what it's about not be lost. And in some cases that's happening, in other cases, unfortunately, it's not happening. And we take steps back if that happens, unfortunately. So I think we need to be very, very aware of that and very careful about that. I think we have to, first of all, we have to get more research if we're going to go with kids. And we don't have it yet. And so we need to go steady, slow, and what we do know works. And that's the direction we've gone with our work. We know a little more about adults. The second thing we need to do is to be extremely careful in our language, to begin to create words that are a common lexicon that we can all agree to and feel good about. So for example, and to make sure that we do things that are as universal as I'm talking about. So, example, we have chimes that we use because we do quiet time in classrooms, but our chimes do not look like a Tibetan bowl, because in reality, the only place I've seen you would be able to get those round bowls that are being used at this conference, for example, would be in a catalog that was a Buddhist catalog. So, for example, we went and we found beautiful chime that is just a nice sort of lengthwise on a beautiful piece of wood, has a beautiful resonance to it, and we bought teachers that so that they wouldn't come in with what they were seeing, you know, in their local, perhaps meditation center, etc. So that's the kind of thing I mean, you know. Or, for example, and hopefully people are not doing this, but, you know, at the end of teaching some yoga practice, you ask the kids to say namaste. Well, first of all, in the Hindu tradition, I know several Hindu friends that will appreciate not having namaste be used in that way, because it, you know, in my tradition it would be like, well, let's have Holy Communion when we have bread and wine. You know, it's not meant to be used in that way. And we're asking kids to say a word that, what does it mean? You know, why are we saying it, etc. So it comes up a lot if we're not aware that if we're coming from an ideology, we really have to have those people that bridge that between the ideology and where we're trying to bring it in, and really, really be honest and realize that public schools are not a place for the other. Two things. I think research is the best way to go right now for K through 12, but also good examples of the work. So, for example, we began our work in 2001 in the New York City schools. Most people feel it's sort of like, some people feel like, well, if you could do it in New York City, you could do it anywhere. And other people feel like, well, New York City is so different, forget it. You know, I'm not sure it's okay here. So now we've been to South Burlington, Vermont. You know, we are in two of the most troubled school districts in Ohio, the Youngstown and the Warren City School District, thanks to Congressman Tim Ryan, who wrote the book Mindful Nation and knows how important his mindfulness practice is, and that we would bring it into schools in his congressional district in ways that are respectful of church and state and also are connected to social and emotional learning work that's already happening in schools. So I think that we need really strong examples, and we need people leading the charge who are an honesty educators. And I think that's a big issue right now, that a lot of the programs that are kind of arising that kind of want entry into schools are programs that, and people that know very little about culture of public schools. And so, again, you could do more harm than good, because this is a whole distinct culture. And, you know, right now I'm doing a project that is in 8 school districts in the country, 8 of the largest school districts in the country. And I could go from Oakland to Anchorage to Nashville, and I could tell you, yes, there's very different cultural populations there, but there's certain things that I'm accepted because it's school culture that I know. You know, yes, I was a principal in the New York City schools, but I know what it's like to be a principal. And it's not so different in Oakland, Nashville, and Chicago, you know. So it's a whole culture and what teachers are expected to do, et cetera, et cetera. So as we come in and offer this big gift, we have to be able to know, you know, that whole context. It's kind of like if somebody outside of Google was the people development person of Google. You know, this is a guy we heard this morning, Rick Fernandez, who was Google, you know, and now he's doing this, you know. Well, that's very different. He knows the culture of Google, what he can say, how he can say it, all of those things. So I think we need both. We need the research, and we need great examples of the work that are research-based to grow and to show that this work can happen in schools, and that it is welcomed and it is acceptable. K through 12 education is probably going through one of the most serious times that I've experienced in the last 40 years in education. And this work in bringing the contemplative practice piece to both the adults and the kids could be a game changer. It really could be. I mean, schools are not happy places right now for either the teachers or the kids. They're places of high stress and test centers. And we have something that we're offering here that could be such a game changer in terms of preparing young people for the kinds of skills they're going to need for the 21st century and the problems that they are going to have to solve. And it's not about, is Paris the capital of France? It's about being able to really use one's mind and get to insight and get to wisdom and get to good decision making and be kind to others and see how interdependent we are and have all of those skills. And that's not going to change. We don't know if what we're teaching in math they're going to need when they grow up, but we do know they're going to need these skills. And so, I'm hoping that we have a real movement in that direction, and K through 12 education will be the same in a positive way.